folks, I thought I would take some time, as promised, to talk about the looper on the TC Helicon Play acoustic and how I use it personally for when I'm performing live on stage. So at the moment I've just got the bare device. I've got it plugged into my Blackstar amp just through the headphone socket, just so that you can hear what's going on. I'm using my Line 6 Variax acoustic, which is plugged in slightly out of frame there, but I will talk through how the looper works without the switch, how the looper works with the switch, how to set it up, and some interesting things you can do with the looper that perhaps you might not have considered. So let's start with the looper setup. So if I press setup and go through the various options, the ones to note here are in system, page 6 of 10. You've got the option to determine which foot switch you want on. Now mine's set to a switch 3 at the moment. You've also got the option of switch 6. So I've left mine at switch 3 because that's the switch I use. And then in page 7 you can define what the switch 3 does. So I'll come back to that later. But for now, on the loop control page, which is page 9 and 10, the important things to note: this first option up here, I've got mine set for the guitar and the aux. I sometimes use the aux in to plug in my iPad, and I use a bass drum from GarageBand to provide some accompaniment. Sometimes I use a backing track off the iPad as well, and plugging it into the aux in is just a convenient way of saving cables. So I've got mine set to use the guitar and aux. The options are just the vocal only, which is just your microphone, just guitar only, just the aux, the vocal and the guitar, which is pretty much the default setting, I think, and the guitar and the aux. Now, I used to use the vocal for things like shakers. The trouble was, when I was working in a duo, my singing partner uses the mic through the TC Helicon so that we can take advantage of the harmonies, and what I found was that sometimes I'd be trying to set up a loop and she'd talk over the top of it, or worse, I'd have to tell her to be quiet while I was setting up the loop, which wasn't particularly, I didn't feel great about that, and it sometimes led to a bit of confusion. We've got an entire recording of a song where she said the word "oh no" while I was setting the loop up, and it plays all the way through, but it's actually quite funny. So I don't bother with the loop mic anymore. If I was working solo, I might consider it, but I feel a bit daft making percussive sounds through the mic anyway. I'm not a great beatboxer, so I don't usually bother, although it would be quite useful for looping backing vocals, for example. So that's how I have mine set, but you can have it set to all as well, so vocal, guitar, and aux. So that's how I've got it set. I've got the undo on, and there's a very good reason for that, which I'll come to, and I've got the loop feedback set at 98%, so it's just slightly quieter than the main guitar, but that's the way I like to have it set up. So with that done, I will move to looping with just the bare unit. So I'm now back at the default page, and you see these two buttons here for up and down through the different effects. If you press both of them together, you go into loop mode, and you have play and record here, stop here, and that also does a raise if you hold it, and then you can exit the looper using the M button. Now, what you noticed is missing is undo, and I have to be honest, I can't remember where it is because I've been using the pedal. So this is how you'd do your looping and find undo. So I'm just going to play a simple loop. I'm just going to record something here, and that's now playing. And if I want to overdub, so you can now hear both layers. And I can have a third layer. And if I press and hold, it undoes that last string I played. Stop it and erase. So let's give you a practical example. So Free Falling is a good song to loop with. got the capo on 3 and I'm playing D, G and A. So let's try this. So that's my first loop set up. Now I'm going to move the capo to the 5th position, play C, F and G. Now I'm going to move down to the 1st position and play E, A and B. Rough, but you get the idea. Now if I want to take off that last loop, you can press and hold undo, and then you can use this with a nice light verse, and then so you can press and hold, and you can take off that last loop that you added, and that gives you a bit of flexibility, so you can sing the verse over this part, and then when you go into the chorus, press and hold, and you've got the other, got it back. Of course you could just play it, but you get the idea. Or you could do something like take it off and use it for emphasis, and that works on a myriad of songs. There's lots of different ways you can use that. So the undo is an underrated feature, I think. So now let's plug in the switch 3 and I'll show you how I use that. Now, being a bit of an old skinflint, I haven't actually got a switch 3. I've got a Digitech FS3X, which is cheaper. I did actually make my first 3-way switch because it was fairly simple to do, but ultimately it wasn't massively robust the way I made it, so I just weakened and bought the Digitech box in the end. So you need a TRS to TRS cable. So one goes in here, and then the other end goes into the pedal socket. Then you can go back to where you were. Now, you might have noticed I've added some nice fancy buttons on here. So green is record, red is stop, and yellow is a dedicated undo button because I use it a lot. So if you remember, when we go back to the setup, button 1, loop record play, switch 2, loop stop erase, switch 3, loop undo. So I've now got a dedicated undo, which for my use is really important. So now I'll give you a quick demo of how I use that. Now, because I play a lot of up-tempo songs with my female singer, I like to put some like rhythm behind it. So if I take a simple example, so I'm just scraping the strings here, and then so now I've got a nice little backing on there. What I can do is add some bass by banging those strings. And then I just play that riff over the top, or I can have to remember is that it's like building blocks. Whatever you put on the bottom is permanent, and the last layer you put on can be done and undone. So you have to think about the order in which you do things. So I always do the rhythm at the bottom, and then possibly the bass if I'm using a bass, and then some patterns over the top. And then the last thing I put on is any embellishments that I want to undo, because you can't undo the first track you put down, you can only undo the last track. So that's an important thing to remember, but that works for me. So I'll put all that together now in like a little loop. So I've dialed in a 12 string on the variacs. Now that's another thing you've always got to remember when you're playing live. I'll leave that in because it's worth noting. When you finish a song, get to the end and then stop and then press erase at the right point. I usually play over the ending so that you can hear it. So yeah, so make sure you've erased for the next track. So anyway, let's try something in this 12 string. So I've just dialed in a nice 12 string sound on the variac. So let's just have a little jam. Let's use the banjo and add it back on. I hope you found it useful. Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see anything else, if you've got any questions, let me know. Just for completeness, the version I'm on is 1.3.00 B48. So there you go. Mine was made in 2021. Okay, thanks folks.